Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. You may know Henry VIII's deeds from the rhyme, and that he wasn't a particularly nice fellow. But what other dark and disturbing things did Henry do during his reign? Welcome to A Day in History, where we'll be exploring the harrowing life of Henry VIII. Henry was never meant to become King of England. His older brother Arthur, Prince of Wales, had that role sewn up. Born at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich on the 28th of June 1491, Henry was brought up to be an educated and strong prince, talented at Latin, French and Italian, as well as hunting, dancing and sports. He picked up his fair share of titles as a boy, from Duke of York to Warden of the Scottish Marshes and Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, all given to him by his father, Henry VII. Henry's luck changed when Arthur was struck down and died aged 15 in 1502, possibly from the sweating sickness. Arthur had just married the young and beautiful Catherine of Aragon, and Henry now found himself handed both her and the country on a silver platter. He became king in 1509 at the tender age of 17, and married Catherine himself. Although nowadays we think of Henry as a squat, fairly fat man, as a youth he was more of an Adonis, strong, athletic, and over 6 feet tall. He was determined to live the good life as king, gorging on fine foods and indulging in whatever his heart desired, whether that was fine decoration, food, wine, women, or all of the above. But for the country, it was all downhill from the moment the crown sat on Henry's head. Henry inherited an enormous fortune from his father and set about squandering it as quickly as he could. His coronation and wedding to Catherine were extravagant, with a grand banquet in Westminster Hall. Across his reign, he hung 20,000 tapestries in his palaces and amassed a collection of 6,500 handguns and over 2,000 pieces of land ordnance. A keen gambler and host, Henry organized scores of parties and soirees as king, further satisfying his love of overindulgence. Henry's biggest bash was the Field of the Cloth of Gold, named after the giant fabric tent constructed for the occasion. Put together to celebrate peace with France in 1520, Henry and King Francis spent the equivalent of £19 million over 18 days. Tournaments, feasts and masquerades were organized, and an enormous temporary palace was created for Henry in Guines. Heaven forbid the king stay anywhere else. With around 12,000 guests, Henry needed to put on a show. There were almost 200,000 litres of wine and 66,000 litres of beer to be quaffed, with swan, peacocks and porpoises offered on the menu as dishes. And, amazingly, Henry didn't eat and drink it all himself. When it was all over, Henry offered gifts of fine horses and delicate jewellery from the finest craftsmen in England. Sadly, this new friendship based on material exchanges was not to last, and he remained at war with France, on and off, for his entire reign. As a young king, Henry was keen to establish himself as a competent military commander. He became known as the father of the Navy for his work establishing a naval force of 50 ships for England. He originally wanted to repeat the success of Henry V and invade France, supported by his advisors. While the short-lived Treaty of London in 1518 smoothed tensions over, everything fell apart after his party with Francis. Henry had mixed success as a warrior and built huge debts fighting France, returning the captured territories back to Francis to clear his burdens. Even scuffles with Scotland continued throughout his reign, known as the Rough Wooing, and that definitely wasn't as fun as it sounds. But aside from this, we all know what Henry was most famous for: marriages, and very quick ends for his unlucky wives, who Henry racked up a fair few of. Before the revolving door of marriages he was later renowned for, he remained married to Catherine for 23 years and 11 months, longer than all his other marriages combined. The couple conceived 7 children, but sadly only their daughter Mary survived beyond infancy. Henry had several mistresses during his marriage to Catherine, most famously Mary Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's sister, and Bessie Blount, who bore him an illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, who died as a teen before he could ever really lay claim to the throne. Worried that he would have no legitimate son to succeed him as king, Henry got cozy with one of the ladies-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, and decided to marry her and separate from Catherine. To justify this, he turned to the Bible, suggesting that Leviticus forbade marrying your brother's widow. Pope Clement was less than impressed and had him excommunicated when the marriage was annulled in 1533. Catherine remained in England and died exiled in 1536. Imagine changing an entire country's religion and killing a whole bunch of people just so you can get a divorce. Anne was a feisty and fierce queen, but Henry had no more luck securing his male heir, with only baby Elizabeth surviving. To bump her off, Henry accused Anne of witchcraft and suggested she was sleeping with an array of courtiers, from Mark Smeaton to her own brother George. From there, it was a quick trip to the Tower, and Anne was executed on the 19th of May, 1536. Within 11 days of Anne's execution, Henry had married wife number 3, Jane Seymour. Theirs was a happy, if short-lived, marriage, and Henry finally achieved his goal of a male heir in Edward, only for Jane to die from an infection from childbirth in 1537. His next wife, Anne of Cleves, was probably the most fortunate, in that she didn't have to deal with him for very long. She married Henry in February 1540, but the marriage was annulled 4 months later, on the grounds that it wasn't consummated, and she had been betrothed to Francis of Lorraine. Apparently, her appearance and Anglicanism failed to impress the king. A lucky escape for her. His fifth wife was known as the Rose Without a Thorn, but her name was Catherine Howard. She was just 19 to Henry's 49 when they married on the 28th of July, 1540. Her alleged affairs with courtiers Thomas Culpeper and Francis Dereham led to her sticky end just 2 years later. Only the king could play away from the marital bed. Henry's final wife was Catherine Parr, who was perhaps the luckiest of all. She got to outlive Henry. A religious reformer, she agreed with Henry's changes and helped him to reconcile with Mary and Elizabeth using the Third Succession Act. This also helped ensure the supremacy of the Tudors on the English throne. Just 2 days after he was crowned, Henry arrested 2 of his father's ministers, Sir Richard Emper and Robert Dudley, for high treason and executed them. That was just the start. Henry's disturbing behavior stretched far further than his treatment of his wives and his father's advisors. Today, historians debate the cause of the cruelty and disturbing behavior he became known for, killing friend, enemy, and wife alike through his reign. As king, Henry had an estimated 57,000 people put to death, more than any other monarch. And his methods were gruesome, from beheadings to burnings. But his favorite was pressing, which involved crushing people to death by placing them under large, heavy slabs of stone and adding weight until the person underneath was as flat as a pancake. After the Reformation and his divorce from Catherine of Aragon, he happily pilloried or executed a number of dissenting monks and nuns, as well as John Fisher and Sir Thomas More, who refused to swear an oath to the king or convert to Protestantism. Turning his attention to the monasteries, Henry transferred their wealth from the Vatican to the Crown with the Second Suppression Act in 1539, bagging himself a cool £120,000, £36 million today, per year in the process. When northern rebels led by Robert Aske opposed his religious reforms, he had the leaders arrested and executed for treason. Even Thomas Cromwell, Henry's matchmaker and mate, was eventually killed for opposing his marriage to Catherine Howard. By the time he was married to Catherine Parr, Henry was a broken and bitter man. His well-known hypochondria gave way to actual health issues, and a jousting accident gave him a gruesome leg wound which ulcerated and left him unable to take part in hunting and sports. He had grown to such proportions that a makeshift crane was needed to help him rise from bed and later to mount his horse. Henry died at the age of 56 on January the 28th, 1547. He was buried at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, beside his third wife, Jane Seymour, mother of Edward, and arguably his favourite of his 6 wives. Do you enjoy discovering racy, rambunctious royals? Make sure you subscribe to A Day in History so you don't miss our videos on the weird and wonderful parts of history. Quick, before Henry beheads you.